Okay, good day. My name is Sebastian. I'm from Wesleyan University, and Konrad is also here from Maastricht University, and we're going to talk about exercising the opt-out right on Android. Now, we have very little to say about privacy policies. We were originally scheduled in a different session, but my flight got canceled, and so Ganesh was so kind to schedule us for this session. We looked at privacy policy, so we do have a little bit to say. So, but just in case you're wondering, okay, what is this? Okay, so this is about Android. And so the context of our talk here is about global privacy control. So this is this idea of opting out, not through a user interface, but rather through sending a signal. So you make one setting in a browser, for example, or a mobile operating system, right? And that opts you out. And you can imagine GPC to be like a little robot that just automatically pushes the button. You go to a website, when you use an app that does that, you can opt out from all websites or just some. It also applies to apps. Many people don't know that, but every thing that uses the web as the underlying communications platform is subject to GPC. And that is also reflected in the laws. So for example, the California Consumer Privacy Act says that you have a right to opt out on a device, which is a physical object. So that's a mobile device. Whether you go through UI or send a signal, the effect should be the same.
I wonder whether we should have had a GPC moose in Canada this time around, rather than a robot.
That's also, a very good idea. GPC in Canada, it's an idea. Maybe some of you are wondering, well, then we have this already, do not track, right? The main difference is, I'm showing here a user interface from Google Chrome, which is the current Google Chrome version. Do not track was not supported by law, which is different for GPC.
But GPC is supported in law in, I think it's 6, is it 6? I've read 6, I don't know if that's, I think it's 6 now.
With the EU, it's 6, but the EU is sort of...
Yeah, when the EU were currently trying to copy the Californians. So the Californians introduced it, and I think we pride ourselves in the EU on GDPR being the gold standard for privacy. But now we're playing catch up, not just in AI, but also in privacy regulation, to potentially have sort of little consent robots or moves or whatever else press those consent banners for us, so we don't have to bother with them anymore. To be continued.
Yeah, you see, Konrad is is really our man for the EU, I think. So we already have something like what Konrad described in Connecticut, California, and Colorado, right? So there are regulators. We are working with regulators there who actually do enforce GPC. And what we want to do is we want to build GPC into the structure of the web. And so the idea is we don't want to tag it on like in just one application, but rather we want to standardize it, at the W3C. And, we've been doing this for 5 years. I suspect it would take maybe another 2 or 3 years, but then hopefully, we actually get it done. GPC technically, just as a background, works with an HTTP header or a DOM property. And here is actually the research. So if you wonder, okay, what's actually the research? Here it is. We asked 2 questions here. For 100 Android apps, we checked, how can I opt out there? How can I claim my CCPA opt-out right? And secondly, when we send a GPC signal, does actually something happen? So these are our 2 questions. And so here you see some of these UIs that we encountered. The left one is, okay, you have a slider, say, okay, do not sell or share my personal information. The one in the middle, far less pleasant. You have to give your email address. And then on the right, there's actually also a question. We have this opt-out system-wide on Android, right? So that seems to be something else. Like what's the relationship, between these 2? Yeah, now comes actually the privacy policy part. As you can see here, so these are the results of our first study. So we looked at 100 apps, and it turns out that 45 of them just have a privacy policy link. So there is no setting at all. It just has a link to a privacy policy. And then 7 apps even don't have that. They don't have a privacy policy. They don't have any way to exercise the opt-out right. So there's 52 apps that have nothing. Right? So you don't need to even look at any web traffic or some other way to determine whether your opt-out is honored. There's just no way for you to do anything.
I mean, I find that this is a little shocking, right? Like, these are the top apps in California, and the half of them don't really do Californian privacy law, right? So that's not good.
Yeah, and then and so the second point, the second question that we looked into is, okay, when we actually do send an opt-out signal to mobile apps, what does actually happen? The short answer is not a whole lot. So briefly as a background, what we would ideally want to happen is that if you send a GPC signal, the first party website /app would translate that for the third parties into an opt-out signal or privacy preference signal or privacy flag rather, right? So Google gives you what is called, for example, restricted data processing, right? And tells you as an app developer, okay, if you have somebody who has a right to opt out, they make use of that right, you need to tell us by enabling RDP, right? And so that's what we looked into. And we send a privacy preference signal, GPC, and we checked, okay, do people actually enable RDP after they receive that signal?
We did something that was slightly cheeky, right? Like we intercepted, we did man in the middle in the network traffic, and we sort of just injected the GPC signal, which by Californian law, apps would have to respect. But, you could argue maybe the servers that we send those GPC signals to weren't quite prepared to do. This is kind of what we found, right? Like that we found almost no impact of either setting the pre-existing Android setting for opt-out, right? This is existing for 15 years and it just doesn't do anything, or nothing that we could really observe. Maybe something server side, we don't know. I don't know if we really trust those ad tech companies to do the right thing. And then, we looked at one specific SDK, the Wrangle SDK, and their for whatever reason, despite us really trying to opt out, 338 apps claimed we were actually opted in, and then just 7% claimed we were opted out. So it's mind-boggling that none of these opt-outs that Californian residents are supposed to have work in practice. And where does this all leave us? So on Android, right, we have this existing opt-out provided by Google, existed for 15 years, doesn't really do anything. In theory, people should be able to set their GPC signal under Californian law. So they're kind of two regimes. And so we argue that both of them should sort of be merged. That, why not Google just use the same button that they already have on Android and just rename it GPC, and then people could actually enforce their legal rights to not be tracked for advertising purposes around the internet on Android. Like it's like a one string change on Android. The infrastructure exists, right? Like Google could do that tomorrow.
I think, yeah, 2 settings for one task, doesn't make quite sense. You don't need to read all of this. I think Konrad, summarized it actually pretty well. Repurposing the ad ID setting, right? I think that is, the main idea here. What we have here, and I think that's, what we leave you with. What is required under California law is that all browsers starting January 2027 need to have a GPC setting. There was originally, that's the interesting part, also a provisional law that required the Android and iOS and other mobile operating systems to have such a setting, but that was taken out. And so, we're left with the browsers. Yeah, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to come to the poster.
Thanks very much.